Everyone in Rockfield knew the man who drove Route 4. They just didn't know they'd forgotten who he really was. The bus depot sat quiet under a thin veil of fog, its glass panes sweating with the weight of early November. Walt Kinney unlocked the gate with 2 clicks and 1 soft grunt, same routine for 17 years, minus the 4 days he stayed home with bronchitis in '09. The metal handle of the garage door felt colder than usual. He chalked it up to age, both his and the season's. Inside, Route 4 waited like an old dog. Walt climbed aboard and flicked the switches without fanfare. The engine turned over with a loyal cough as he reached for the worn lever to adjust the mirror. The sun broke low through the trees, light caught on the paracord bracelet around his wrist. Olive green, sun-faded, the knot loosened just slightly from decades of wear. No one ever asked why he wore it, and he never volunteered the story. By 6:55, the bus rolled past Maple Cup Diner. The aroma of frying bacon and stale coffee briefly slipped through the open side vent. Walt glanced at the corner window booth. Empty today, the handwritten closed Monday Veterans Week prep sign hung crooked, curling at one edge like the corner of a smile. At stop number 3, teenagers piled on in puffs of deodorant and sarcasm. No good morning, no eye contact. One of them, dark hoodie earbuds in, snapped a picture as Walt adjusted his cap. Another leaned in toward Sarah Boone, who smirked and whispered, "He's like if oatmeal were a person." She tapped twice on her phone screen and posted the clip. Walt, yawning behind the wheel, lips pressed shut like someone afraid of too much space. She captioned it, "The human snooze button." Walt didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't react. He kept the bus steady, hands at 10 and 2 eyes ahead. The road wound gently past Rockfield High, then toward the community courthouse where sun caught on the brass scales above the door. Red Harlan stood outside his porch, as always. Thermos in hand, raising it an inch in Walt's direction. Walt returned the nod, small, solemn, the kind men of a certain generation gave instead of waving. At stop 7, Mrs. Dobbs climbed aboard with a floral cart in tow and a candy in her hand. "Morning, Mr. Kinney," she said too loudly, the kind of loud that came from years of not quite hearing yourself anymore. Walt stood, took her elbow, and guided her to her usual seat. She pressed the butterscotch into his palm. For the road, she smiled, then immediately forgot she'd given it. Sarah watched the exchange but didn't film this time. Something about the motion felt too quiet, too not funny. The route curved east, passing Veterans Memorial Park. Bronze leaves swirled on the sidewalk, bumping up against the iron fencing. Walt slowed slightly as he approached, his gaze resting on a tarnished plaque near the flagpole. The names carved into it were all uppercase, all bold. One name at the bottom had a chip in the second letter. He looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, then eased the bus forward again. At the final stop, students poured out, dragging backpacks and conversations about cafeteria pizza. Someone lingered at the back row, snickering. "Bet he's never done a thing worth remembering," the boy muttered. Laughter followed, low, conspiratorial. Walt didn't flinch. He reached down and pressed 2 fingers to the paracord at his wrist, thumb, brushing its frayed edge like a worrystone. The insult passed like a cold breeze. He waited for silence, closed the door, and pulled away. Later that morning, Route 4 idled at a traffic light near Elm and Vine. Walt adjusted the mirror slightly, scanning the corner. The diner across the street hadn't opened yet. A black sedan rested near the curb, engine humming quietly. Inside, a woman in a dark suit with federal posture sat still. A photograph held at chest height. Her eyes flicked from paper to windshield, back again, lips unmoving. Her right thumb hovered over the corner of the photo like she was afraid it might tear. At a corner, a dark sedan idles. Inside, a woman in a black suit compares Walt's image to a faded photograph. Walt's past wasn't in any parade, but it lived in the details, like the bracelet nobody noticed, and the bread he always paid for, even when it was free. The bell above the Maple Cup diner door gave its usual double ding, sharp and metallic against the warm hum of breakfast chatter. Walt Kinney stepped inside the cold from outside, clinging to his jacket like static. The booth by the window had already been claimed by a pair of construction workers, voices low over a plate of bacon and eggs. Walt nodded toward the counter and took his spot, second stool from the end. His hands rested on the worn laminate fingers, curled in the same calm clasp he used behind the wheel. Black coffee, 1 egg, pumpkin bread, the cook called over his shoulder. His name was Dwight, and he'd been saying those words to Walt every November for 6 years. Walt nodded once, appreciated. The coffee arrived first in a ceramic mug with a small chip on the lip. Walt rotated it so the chip faced away. A moment later, the plate followed toast, stacked on top of the pumpkin bread. To keep it warm, an egg over easy beside it. A small note lay tucked beneath the plate, scrap paper, with Free Vet WK scribbled in blue ink and underlined twice. Walt slipped a $10 bill under the saucer anyway and took a quiet sip. Sarah Boone sat at the corner booth, earbuds and laptop open. Her head tilted slightly as she watched her phone screen. A second earlier, she'd checked the video she posted yesterday. Over 13,000 views, the top comment read, "That's the guy who pulled my uncle out of the crowd in Chicago." "I swear it," Sarah blinked. There was no punchline in the comment, no emojis, just that. She glanced up. Walt didn't notice her. Or maybe he did. Either way, he didn't look over. She watched him tuck the bracelet inside his sleeve before reaching for his fork. Somewhere 2 hours away, in a fluorescent-lit records room in Cleveland, Tommy Nguyen hunched over his desk, half a bagel in one hand, stylus in the other. His coworker Rami had sent him the video with the caption, "Your vintage vet bracelet, obsession strikes again." Tommy had laughed until he paused the video at the 0 to 12 mark and zoomed in. He knew that bracelet, not the kind you bought online. This was hand-knotted custom OD green Vietnam-style braid, one strand longer than the rest. He'd seen it before in a grainy black-and-white photo, buried in a file labeled Irregular Honors, Classified, Chicago 85. Tommy minimized the video and pulled up the Federal Archive tool, Kinney Walter Enter 1 match, redacted, but enough to confirm a connection. He leaned closer. The name had been flagged in 1995 for civilian distinction, but the review was marked incomplete. He stood bagel forgotten and strode down the hallway to the file room. It was time to dig. Back in Rockfield, Walt exited the diner just as the school bus rolled by. He crossed the street, tipped his cap to a woman walking a Labrador, then headed for his stop. 10 minutes later, he eased the city bus out of its depot space, Route 4 blinking overhead in green letters. Halfway through his shift, he paused at the corner of Main and Tiller. A young mother waited with a stroller, one wheel wobbling where it caught on a sidewalk crack. Walt opened the doors, stepped down, and lifted the front end of the stroller gently. The mother gave a startled laugh, then a grateful smile. "Thank you," she said. Walt only nodded and returned to his seat. Sarah sat a few rows back, watching. Her phone stayed in her coat pocket. This time, in Cleveland, Tommy sat cross-legged on the file room floor, a pile of folders beside him. One manila envelope bore a black stamp, "Review pending, eyes only." He opened it slowly. Inside was a copy of a memo from the Secret Service dated August 1985. The note was short, just 2 sentences. Kinney Walter. Civilian intervention, Secret Service asset. Evacuation, Chicago, 1985. Medal pending review. His breath caught. The paper trembled slightly in his hand. He scanned the memo again to make sure it wasn't a joke. Back at her booth, Agent Rebecca Grant scrolled through the forwarded message on her phone. A still image from the bus video accompanied the note, zoomed in, cropped to Walt's face, half-shadowed by a smudged windshield, the bracelet just barely visible under his sleeve. Agent Grant receives a text, found him, Route 4, Rockfield. Ohio still wears the bracelet. He never made the town's hero wall, but his name lived in places they never looked. The fluorescent lights in the VA archive room buzzed overhead, giving everything a tint of tired gray. Agent Rebecca Grant sat cross-legged on the floor, holding a black and white photo at arm's length, angled to catch what little light slipped through the slit windows. The photo had been folded too many times. The face in the corner was blurred, partial profile, wearing a helmet and a serious expression, but the paracord bracelet on his wrist was clear. Same knot, same braid, same fray near the clasp. She turned the photo over. No name. Just the word Chicago in faint pencil scrawl and a date, August 1985. Her thumb hovered over her phone screen. A message draft waited half-written, unsent. Meanwhile, in Rockfield, Walt Kinney stepped through the lobby of the town hall with a small brown wallet in his hand. He'd found it wedged between the backseat cushions that morning. Inside, $24, an expired driver's license, a church bulletin from 2018. He placed it gently on the clerk's desk. "Lost and found," he said. The clerk looked up, briefly, nodded once, and returned to her keyboard. Walt stood there for a second longer than necessary, then left without a word. Sarah Boone was already outside, pacing beneath the Veterans Day banner taped to the entry awning. The list of honorees was pinned to a bulletin board beside the door. Printed in bold font were names like Edward Finch, Jameson, Riley, Teresa Yates. She read them twice. "Where's Mr. Kinney?" she asked as soon as Mayor Klein emerged from the building. Klein, holding a steaming cup of cider, blinked slowly. "Excuse me, Walter Kinney. He's a veteran, right? Why isn't he listed for the parade?" The mayor adjusted his scarf. "We have criteria. Public records confirmed honors. That's what we base it on." Sarah's voice sharpened. "So the guy who drives the bus every day, and probably saved people, doesn't count, unless there's paperwork." "I'm not saying he doesn't deserve recognition," Klein replied carefully. "But without substantiated record, we can't." She turned away mid-sentence. Back at Walt's apartment, the smell of old paper and lemon polish lingered in the air. Books lined two walls, mostly nonfiction, mostly unopened. A folded blanket sat on the arm of a threadbare recliner. On a small shelf, above the television, sat a coffee tin, the kind that once held loose tobacco. Inside were 6 medals, their ribbons faded but neatly coiled. Walt opened it slowly. Sarah stood a few feet away, eyes wide. "You keep them in a can?" she asked. Walt shrugged. "Didn't have much call to wear them." He pulled a folded flag from the drawer below the shelf. "This one's from a medic. Carried him back during a market fire. Never knew if he made it." Sarah said nothing, but her fingers curled into her sleeves. Down the street, Red Harland adjusted the latch on his gate. He caught Sarah walking back and called to her. "Your face is all twisted up," he said. "That about Kinney." She nodded. "Mayor says he's not confirmed," Red huffed. "I watched Walt pull a kid out of an ice pond in '94. Didn't make the paper, didn't want it to. People forget easy. Doesn't mean he's not worth remembering." Across state lines, Agent Grant finally hit send to Department of Defense. Recognition Services subject. Civilian intervention, review, request. Walter Kinney. Begin formal honors request. He doesn't know yet, but it's time. She exhaled as the message disappeared. Later that night, in her bedroom, Sarah opened her laptop and began typing. The keys clicked faster than usual, less hesitation between lines. Title: The Man Behind Route 4, The Hero We Missed. Walt had lived in Rockfield longer than most, but somehow his name was never etched into its memory. The depot's waiting room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and winterizing rubber. Outside wind stirred brittle leaves along the sidewalk, tapping them against the door in uneven bursts. Walt Kinney stood in front of the bulletin board beside the break room. A flyer hung there, bright and official. The headline read, "Veterans Day Parade, Honoring Local Heroes." Names were listed beneath in two neat columns: Finch, Riley, Yates, McAllister. None of them were his. He studied the flyer for less than 10 seconds, then turned away. The coffee in his foam cup was cold, but he drank it anyway. Across town, Sarah Boone stood in front of her English teacher's desk, arms folded. A printed version of her article sat between them, marked up in red pen. Mr. Landers glanced over his glasses. "Veterans Day Assembly is already planned," he said. "Besides, this isn't exactly confirmed, is it? He's on the bus route every day." "He saved people," she shot back. Landers sighed. "Sarah, we need documented citations. A story like this, it makes people uncomfortable when it's not official." She grabbed the article and left without another word. That evening, the Rockfield Town Council met inside their paneled chamber, lit by humming fluorescents and warmed by an old radiator clicking at odd intervals. Councilwoman Martin shuffled papers while Mayor Klein stirred his tea. "I'm not opposed to recognizing the man," Martin said. "But we'd be opening ourselves up to questions. Why him? Why now?" Mayor Klein nodded. "We just need something verifiable. Records, a citation. Maybe." Then Red Harland stood from the back row, leaning heavy on his cane. "I've got a story," he said. The room quieted. Winter of '94, kid got turned around during a whiteout. People were panicking. Walt found him, carried him 3 blocks in knee-deep snow. Kid's lips were turning blue. "I saw him hand that boy to his mama myself." Councilwoman Martin asked, "Was that ever recorded?" "Nope," Red said. "Didn't need to be kids still alive." Silence followed, just the radiator ticking. A few hundred miles away, in a government server room, Agent Grant received a secure email marked "Confirmation." She opened it with trembling fingers. A single line stared back, "Kinney Walter. Action recognized, declassification complete. Public acknowledgement authorized, back in Rockfield." Sarah sat on the worn carpet of Walt's apartment, her back against the bookshelf. She had helped him change the batteries in his smoke detector, then stayed when he offered tea in a mug with a chipped rim. He didn't speak much, only nodded occasionally, his eyes fixed on something decades away. Later, as he dozed off in his recliner, she moved to his old desktop. The screensaver flickered with bouncing stars. She nudged the mouse and the screen brightened. An unread email blinked at the top of the inbox. Subject request: "You are invited to lead the Veterans Day Parade." From Rockfield Veterans Committee. Sarah sees an email on Walt's old desktop. Request: "You are invited to lead the Veterans Day Parade." Walt hasn't opened it. For the first time in 30 years, Route 4 came to a full stop, and it wasn't Walt who braked. The sun rose clean and bright over Rockfield's main street, slicing through the crisp November air like a trumpet's first note. Flags lined the lampposts, snapping gently in the breeze. Folding chairs scraped against sidewalk concrete as townsfolk settled in with hot cider and knit gloves, the smell of cinnamon mingling with diesel from the barricaded intersections. Walt Kinney stood behind the bus depot, holding a jacket still in its dry-cleaning plastic. His name, Du Kinney, was stitched above the breast pocket in neat gold thread. The sleeves were pressed flat. His fingers hovered over the hanger's hook for a moment, before he pulled the cover away. Inside the dispatch office, no one gave him orders. No one said why he'd been asked to drive Route 4 solo down the parade route. Only a note taped to the wheel. "Drive slow, park at the square, wait." He slid into the seat and adjusted the mirror. The paracord bracelet rested just beneath the cuff of his uniform. He exhaled through his nose, then turned the key. Outside, the town buzzed with pre-ceremony energy. Children waved flags. A dog barked near the cider stand, and the school band, three tubas, short, struggled through. My country, 'tis of thee. No one noticed the two black SUVs that had slipped into position 1 block west of the square. Red Harland adjusted the brim of his cap, watching from a bench, with a folded program in his lap. Sarah Boone stood beside him, scanning the crowd. Heart pounding for reasons she didn't yet understand. Mrs. Dobbs clutched a foam cup with both hands wrapped in fingerless gloves. Then the bus appeared. It rolled slow and smooth, gleaming, like it hadn't in years. The windshield had been polished. The town's seal had been wiped clean. As it reached the center of Main Street, the band stopped playing. Mid-note, two black vehicles pulled up behind it, quietly, precisely. Doors opened. Men and women in suits stepped out, some with earpieces, others holding their hands clasped in front of them, like sentries from a silent era. Gasps fluttered across the crowd. Agent Rebecca Grant approached the makeshift podium. Her suit was navy, her shoes polished, her eyes unwavering. In 1985, she said into the mic, "A man saved lives under fire. He did so without recognition, without reward, and without regret. Today we remember him." She stepped aside. The bus door hissed open. Walt descended slowly, every step measured. He looked not at the crowd, but at the concrete beneath his feet, as if unsure it would hold. For a long second, no one moved. Then Red Harland stood. He raised his hand in a salute. Firm, level, slow. Others followed: Sarah, Mrs. Dobbs, a man near the cider stand, the woman from the library. One by one, people rose, not with clapping, not yet, but with reverent silence. A boy in a hoodie lowered his phone. A woman near the bakery wiped her eyes. Then someone began to clap. It started soft, then stronger. The applause swelled like a slow tide. Flags waved higher. The mayor caught off guard, adjusted his tie and tried to find a reason to speak, but didn't. Walt blinked. The sound washed over him, uninvited, unanticipated. He turned slightly and saw Sarah at the edge of the crowd. She stepped forward. He leaned in. "I was just trying to help," she replied without missing a beat. "You still are." Walt didn't need a medal. He needed to know he hadn't disappeared. The sun slanted low across Veterans Memorial Park, casting long golden beams that caught the edges of flags, folding chairs and cider steam. Children darted between knees, waving miniature stars and stripes, their laughter weaving gently through the soft, brassy hum of the town band. Walt Kinney stood off to the side, his hands loosely folded in front of him, the paracord bracelet no longer tucked beneath a sleeve. It glinted openly now, catching the last warmth of November light. In the center of the park, beneath a flagpole freshly repainted for the occasion, stood a stone bench. Its surface was smooth, its corners rounded with care. A brass plate set into the center read, "Walter Kinney." For the miles he carried more than passengers, Mr. Kinney, a young woman asked, clipboard in hand. "They're ready." He nodded once and walked forward slowly, his steps steady though his knees ached. As he reached the bench, the crowd fell silent. He didn't sit immediately. He rested a hand on the cool stone and looked at the plaque, blinking once, then twice. Sarah Boone stepped onto the small platform to the left. Her voice was clear, though her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the page. Today, she began, we celebrate someone whose story was almost never told. He didn't ask for recognition, but that doesn't mean he shouldn't have it. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. She paused, then continued. For years, he drove Route 4 on time without complaint in heat and snow. But before that, long before Rockfield ever knew his name, he was already someone worth remembering. She folded the page and stepped back. Agent Rebecca Grant approached next, a folded flag cradled in her arms. Walt saw her eyes, green, sharp, unflinching. She held out the flag without speaking. at first and then pulled a small photo from within the folds. "This was my father," she said softly. "He wrote this the week after you carried him out of that alley in Chicago." She offered the note, aged and creased but intact. Walt took it with both hands. His fingers didn't shake, but they held it like something sacred. He didn't cry, but he did lower his head slightly, eyes fixed on the writing. The crowd remained quiet. Even the children seemed to still. Mrs. Dobbs stepped forward, eyes glassy but bright. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a piece of butterscotch candy wrapped in crinkled cellophane. "You always stopped for me," she said, placing it gently in his palm. "Now we stopped for you, Walt." Managed a small smile. Red Harlan stood near the edge of the platform. Their eyes met. This time Walt brought his right hand to his brow and saluted just once, a clean line, no hesitation. Red returned it without a word. The moment held, then the band resumed a slow tune, something old, something quiet. People relaxed, chairs creaked. A pie cooled on a windowsill behind the library. Nearby, someone poured the last of the cider into paper cups. Walt turned and sat on the bench. His hands rested in his lap, one still curled loosely around the candy. Sarah eased down beside him, her knees bent toward him, not away. She didn't speak at first. The flag folded in perfect triangles sat between them. This time he murmured, "I think I'll stay a while." The bus driver with the quiet eyes never asked to be remembered, but sometimes the ones who ask least are the ones we need to remember most. What began as a routine ride through a small town ended in applause, not for a performance, but for a life quietly lived with dignity, duty, and grace. In a world that often overlooks what's humble, Walt Kinney reminded us that kindness isn't loud. It lingers in silence, in service, and in steady hands, like a porch light left on in the dark. A simple act of decency can guide someone home. And maybe today, in your own corner of the world, there's someone whose quiet goodness deserves to be seen.